A poor woman in a faded hoodie stepped into the world's most elite shooting range, her revolver wrapped in cloth, her sneakers stained by time. She carried no name, no pedigree, no brand. Her presence was a glitch in the system, and yet within 10 minutes her name would erase legacies, her silence would dismantle empires. A woman they laughed at would make the world's strongest men weep. You have to hear this story to the end before we begin. Tell us where you're watching from in the comments, and if this story moves you, don't forget to follow for more. What happened at Silverwood Range was never meant to be known to the public. It was a private spectacle buried in the hills of Virginia, hosted once a year for the war-born elite. The Silverwood Heritage Cup was less a competition and more a ritual of dominance. Invitations were etched, not printed, delivered by armored couriers with encrypted biometric locks and guarded by private military. Black Star Systems Rathon and Lockheed Martin lined the digital walls with their logos. The event was sealed from civilian eyes, a $50 million celebration of supremacy. Every handshake inside could launch a war. Every smirk was a silent threat among this fortress of steel and wealth. She arrived alone, no entourage, no drone escort, just a folded invite stained and creased, tucked inside the waistband of her jeans. Calla moved like vapor, unnoticed by many, but impossible to ignore. Once seen, her face was bare of makeup, her brown hair tied into a loose braid that had unraveled in the wind. Her hoodie was gray, once now faded to the color of forgotten concrete. The frayed cuffs spoke of years, not fashion. She walked among men who wore medals like gods and women in heels sharpened like blades. Men who dictated military protocols from satellites and women who shaped governments with a smile and a whisper. Their glances sliced her open. Their laughter was currency in this kingdom, and she was bankrupt. The range itself was a marvel, 10 digitally synced lanes, calibrated by AI. The air reeked of gun oil, cigars, and privileged glass walls mirrored the sky. Drones buzzed overhead, tracking every breath, but somehow none of them expected her. They saw her and didn't see her because they couldn't understand what they saw. "You look at this antique lady over here," someone barked across the crowd. Did someone invite cosplay to the battlefield? His laughter was picked up by mics and broadcast across the internal feed. "Go home and bake pies, sweetheart. This isn't a movie," said another voice. Cut in. The audience laughed, then paused. Someone in a velvet coat pulled out his phone, snapped a photo, and whispered, "She's a walking thrift store." Those words started it, and the venom spread like smoke through the crowd. Calla stopped at the registration gate where two former Marines blocked her path. Their eyes scanned her from hoodie to scuffed sneakers. "Sweetheart, the cafeteria's that way." One sneered, his badge reading Carter beside him, a veteran with snow-colored stubble. Chuckled, "That antique's older than my grandpa." "What is this vintage week?" The crowd chuckled, like a hive of polished jackals. Generals leaned over to whisper. Senators sipped from the gold-rimmed tumblers. Someone hissed, "How did she get past security?" Her invitation was scanned, twice flagged, then waved through the system. Glitched, but only for her. Nobody saw that part. Nobody asked. The guards were instructed to let her pass silently. Calla said nothing. She gripped the revolver wrapped in burned cloth and waited. The cloth had once been her brother's uniform, a piece of it charred during a classified mission. Nobody but her knew what that mission cost. Nobody but her that knew the revolver had once saved 5 men behind enemy lines. Its grip smoothed by time, its barrel worn but straight. It had no optics, no smart targeting, no recoil mod, just iron and fire and faith in hands that refused to shake. She stepped past the guards. The crowd parted. Not out of respect, but revulsion. She didn't belong. She was in an algorithmic anomaly in a world of curated prestige, and as she moved toward the prep zone, the laughter grew louder, sharper. A Lockheed executive leaned into his assistant. Did she wander in from a salvage yard? His voice was picked up by a journalist who was already drafting a private stream update. Captioned, "Silverwood or Skid Row." The likes on that post tripled every second. Some of the attendees snapped photos of her sneakers. Others zoomed in on the revolver. One comment read, "I've seen museum." "Piece is in better shape," another said. "Maybe she's here for the catering." Every sentence was a blade. Calla kept walking. Her face didn't crack. Her eyes didn't flicker. She looked ahead like the path was already written, and she was just reading it aloud silently. A small group near the media booth began filming with commentary. Defense consultant Clara Marsh whispered into her mic, If she shoots, I'll eat my badge. Even the interns laughed behind them near the bleachers. A retired colonel adjusted his tie and muttered, she'll miss the target entirely, and we'll all have a good laugh, yeah. Here's what the crowd didn't know. A few days earlier, the signal went dark in the Pentagon's Raven X server farm, buried 10 levels below the Defense Intelligence Complex. A ping from an old code name, Ghost 47 Wacth 7, blinked to life, a system locked for 12 years, opened for 6 seconds, and then vanished. That 6 seconds redirected an invitation to a dead drop in Akron, Ohio. 30 hours later, that invite appeared in Kala's hands, and that's when the system knew, but the people did not. As she reached the shooter's lane, someone called him out, "Where's your scope? Where's your brain? You look like you built that in a high school shop class." Someone else mocked her. "Hoodie, was that sewn from a tent?" The laughter rose again, not just cruel, but unified. Kala said nothing. Still, the silence was not submission. It was coiled. It was sharp. It waited. The announcer adjusted his mic, clearing his throat with exaggerated pomp. "Let's give our comedy division guest a warm welcome, shall we?" The audience laughed, clapped, some even whistled. The scoreboard displayed a name, Kala Reed, in glitching red, as if the system itself rejected her identity. She stepped up to the firing lane, slowly, deliberately. The revolver in her hands felt like truth. Everyone mocked her grip, but none noticed it, never trembled, not once her thumb brushed the trigger guard. Her eyes narrowed, not in fear, but calculation. The glass walls reflected the crowd behind. Her face is smeared with disdain, arrogance gleaming like weaponized cologne. Then the camera zoomed in for the private feed. The commentary began. "Watch closely. She's gonna blow it. This should be good." A teachable moment for the peasants, and yet across the globe, in encrypted black sites and ghost networks, old agents turned to stare. A name they hadn't heard in 15 years reappeared on screen. Kala Reed in the crowd, a guest with a NATO pin, frowned deeply, then opened a secure app, his hands trembling. The moment the feed hit his screen, a text auto-triggered, "She's back." Message was forwarded through 4 layers of clearance and landed on the desk of one man, General Alexander Callahan. When he saw the feed, he rose from his seat. In silence, the room around him stopped breathing. Back at the range, Kala loaded one bullet, then another. 5 in total, slow, steady, deliberate. Every chamber, click echoed through the bones of the building. Nobody clapped. Now someone whispered, "Is she actually going to fire?" The judges looked bored. A few checked their watches, one even rolled his eyes. But Kala's hand moved with precision. Not performance, her hoodie now seemed less like poverty and more like armor. She looked at the target, then at the revolver. Then she whispered 6 words under her breath, so soft no one could hear them. "I didn't come to be seen." Then she raised the gun. The breath of the entire range caught the trigger. Clicked. The bullet flew and everything changed. You watching this from LA, New York? Dubai, Nairobi, Manila, London. I need you to tell me in the comments right now. Because what's about to unfold has nothing to do with a poor woman or an old revolver. This is about power. This is about the illusion of supremacy and how sometimes it takes a ghost to burn a kingdom down. Stay with me. You haven't even seen what she does with the second shot yet. Kala stood in silence. As the echo of her first shot faded into the steel bones of the range, the sudden clarity that followed sliced through the thick air of mockery like a blade through silk. The laughter stopped, not because they wanted to, but because something in that sound, something ancient and precise, struck the core of the place. Silverwood, the fortress of prestige, had never been shaken this early in the program, certainly not by someone like her. But Kala didn't look up at the gasps or the quick clicking of devices. She simply stared ahead at the target, her eyes still and unflinching, her grip relaxed as if her revolver had always been. A natural extension of her body. The scoreboard blinked, uncertain, then flashed a red 10-0 perfect center bullseye. A few muttered, "Too easy, beginner's luck, range error." Someone called tech support, but nobody laughed this time, and Kala knew better than to respond to no noise. She turned slightly, adjusted her footing, and let her breath steady. It wasn't just training, it was instinct. Centuries-old instinct passed not through instruction, but through survival. Not through glory, but through necessity, sir. Thoughts drifted not to winning, but to her brother. 17 years old, stationed in Kandahar, when she was 10. The only family she remembered, the revolver had been his, once passed down to him from someone else, with calloused hands and no name. She remembered the weight of it in her hands when it was first wrapped in the corner of his burned uniform, a gesture not of nostalgia, but of responsibility. He had told her once, "You never need more than 6 bullets if you know exactly who you're aiming for." The second shot came quick, faster than anyone expected. She didn't give them time to dismiss the first as luck. Another shot, another 10-0. Now the crowd leaned in. This was no accident. This was math, precision, and something colder, something they couldn't quite explain or understand. Even the judges started whispering. One tapped his pen against the tablet. Another checked the security feed. Calla breathed slowly, the breath not of someone looking for permission, but of someone used to being denied. Everything and doing it anyway from birth, Calla had been a system anomaly. Her birth certificate had no hospital logo. Her foster record showed more blank entries than names. She had disappeared from government tracking at age 18. Not by accident, but by design. Her last listed address was a shipping container near a shut-down airbase in Ohio. She had left no photos, no friends, only a name etched on a small military plaque no one claimed. And yet here she stood among former generals, heirs to defense corporations, and women who wore blood diamonds with military insignia engraved at the base of their necks. Calla was the opposite of all of them, but she didn't care. They weren't her target. The third bullet flew faster than the second, more confident, deliberate. The board flashed another 10. This time a few in the crowd gasped audibly. Someone dropped their champagne glass. The chime of broken crystal reverberated through the hall like a warning bell. A senator's aide whispered, "She's ghosting." The AI tracking and someone else hissed, "Shut up before your clearance gets flagged." A weapons technician, hidden behind mirrored glass, clutched her headset and started murmuring into an encrypted channel, her fingers shaking. Calla lowered her weapon for a second, just to roll her wrist, not from strain, but to check timing, the time between her breaths, the pattern of wind inside the semi-open range. It was too clean, almost artificial, designed to simulate perfection, but Calla had learned an imperfection. In rooms that shook from overhead bomb tests, in tents that leaked during recon briefings in Afghanistan, her brother had once let her stay silent beneath a cot while armed men raided their temporary shelter. He had never told command because he had never trusted them fully. And after he died, Calla stopped trusting anything but her hands and her aim. She fired again. The fourth shot cutting through the stillness like thunder. No optics, no adjustment, just instinct and steel. The board flared a fourth. 10. A spectator near the executive booth stood up, jaw slack, and muttered, "She's not calculating, she's listening. What the hell is she listening to?" Calla's left eye twitched slightly, her mind adjusting for the echo bounce of her own shot across the range. The air, the slight tremor under her feet, the vibration through the concrete. This wasn't magic, this was tuning in. Most people tried to dominate the range to own it. Calla let it tell her exactly what to do. The fifth bullet almost sang as it left the chamber. The board hesitated, longer this time, blinking before settling into another 10. The scoreboard now glowed like a warning beacon, and the audience shifted, not just physically but emotionally. Discomfort, unease, some were angry, some terrified, some confused. Executives began pulling out private secure comms behind mirrored cases, sliding fingers across encrypted devices, trying to find out who this woman was. But no search brought anything they could use. Her face wasn't on any contractor record, no. Military file matched her DNA, scrubbed her data fingerprint, missing completely as if she had never existed. And that frightened them more than anything, because only one kind of person could hide like that. Not a rebel, not a hacker, not a civilian, but someone made invisible by design, someone trained to exist behind sight. Calla adjusted the revolver and loaded the remaining single bullet. The sixth and final round, her fingers moved slowly. Not because she needed to think, but because this part always made her remember the last time she'd done it in real combat, when things weren't clean. When she wasn't a ghost, just a girl shaking in a burned car door, hiding under a corpse that had saved her. The last bullet had counted. Then it counted now, and yet her body moved like the memory didn't burden her. It became rhythm. Each movement a beat in a song only she knew. From the front of the range, someone spoke up, a man with a clipped British accent, likely from a Blackar subsidiary. His voice attempted a joke, half-hearted. "Well, at least we know she can count to 5 more," chuckles, a forced kind, as if the crowd was desperate to remember how to feel superior. But Calla didn't flinch. She raised the revolver again, the muzzle steady, her stance unshaken, her breath soft. One of the younger competitors behind her murmured to his coach, "I think she's using micro-breath intervals." The coach didn't respond, his hand hovering above his holster. Calla whispered again, not to herself, but as a cue to the silence aim. Small miss, small. The sixth shot left her hand like lightning and hit harder than the sound could carry. When the board flashed the final 10, the entire range dropped into a near-holy silence. This wasn't a woman making a point. This was a weapon in the shape of a woman reminding everyone what true aim meant. Not mechanical, not coded, not engineered, but born from pain, repetition, and the sharp edge of memory. The crowd didn't know that 3 years ago in a non-sanctioned black site in Siberia, Calla had once made a shot from a broken observation deck in 40 degrees, with her eyes half frozen in a cracked scope they didn't know, because the file was destroyed and everyone on that op was either buried or erased, including her team. They didn't know because her name had been scrubbed at her own request, not for guilt, but for freedom. Calla didn't shoot for medals or contracts. She shot because someone had to know the world's most powerful systems could still be broken by a person who refused to be. Bought the crowd, didn't cheer. Some looked down, ashamed, some stunned, a few furious. They wanted a system that obeyed rules, but Calla had always been the glitch, the question, the exception, the lesson. And as she holstered the revolver with quiet precision, her fingers brushed the edge of the cloth wrap once more. Her brother's name faintly burned into the corner of the fabric, just initials, now unreadable but sacred to her. The range announcer didn't speak. The scoreboard was frozen and someone from the judges' panel stood and stepped back as if he had just seen the end of something he couldn't name. Calla turned slightly, looking over the rows of faces, none familiar, none worthy. Then she looked to the glass wall behind the judges. The reflection caught something black fast ascending. Rotor blades a shadow across the sky. Her ride had arrived, not summoned, but always scheduled, exactly on time. Because the system might forget, but command never did. And somewhere deep beneath the Pentagon, a file labeled Ghost 47 Y7 flickered alive again next to one simple word, reactivate. As the 6 shots echo faded into the steel skeleton of Silverwood, the silence that followed was no longer just awe, it was fear. The kind of fear only known by those who'd built their power on unshakable systems and were now watching the cracks appear in real time. Calla didn't move. She didn't smile, didn't react, didn't even blink as the board held 6 consecutive perfect scores in burning red. She had become a fault line beneath a gilded empire. And yet, the storm had only begun. Behind her, a senator's aide fumbled with a headset, trying to reach an encrypted line. A weapons manufacturer executive muttered something about code breaches. One of the analysts ran a thermal scan of the lane, convinced the revolver must be loaded with illegal tech. The results came back clean. That's when they began to panic. The judges' panel exchanged quiet but sharp glances. One whispered into his mic, "Revert to manual override. She's tampering with the digital optics." Another responded, "The optics are off. Her shots are clean. No tampering." There was a pause. Then came the dreaded question. Then who the hell is she? But they wouldn't get their answer, not from the system. Not yet. Because Calla was no longer within the range of their known variables. And the range itself, built with billions in predictive architecture, had not accounted for a woman trained to shoot without depending on machines. While the crowd sat frozen between reverence and disbelief, a quiet protocol initiated from deep beneath the earth in a bunker embedded in the Virginia bedrock. A retinal scan activated, followed by a classified voice print. Alexander Callahan, priority clearance, Raven X override, confirmed. From that moment, the stage was no longer theirs, it was his. But Calla didn't wait for that part. She turned slowly, not with grandeur, but with purpose. Her eyes swept the crowd like a radar system locked on signatures. Not faces. She didn't need names. She remembered voices. The voice that had laughed first, the one that called her cosplay, the one that snapped her photo, and the one that whispered, "She's a charity case." They all now sat as if nailed to their chairs. But instead of confrontation, Calla walked calmly off the platform toward the staging table. One of the assistants, a young woman barely out of the academy, Her blazer, too stiff, stood there paralyzed. She had been one of the few who hadn't laughed. In fact, she had looked away. Now she found herself in Calla's path. For a moment, the two women locked eyes. Calla placed the revolver on the table, the cloth wrap folding beneath it like an offering. Then she spoke for the first time that day. "Check it. Clean. No mods." Her voice was calm but edged in something too steady to be rehearsed. The assistant blinked, then nodded. "Yes, ma'am," she said, barely above a whisper. Her hands trembled slightly as she began the scan. It took only seconds to confirm. No AI, no enhancements, pure analog, pure impossibility. While this unfolded, deeper within the VIP lounge, security protocols tightened, doors locked, signals jammed. The range's private servers shifted to offline backup. One executive, Roland Marsh, VP of Black Star Systems, was pacing now, his voice thick with fury as he barked into a redline phone. "Get me direct access to the NATO node. If this is what I think it is, we've been compromised at the highest level." But even he didn't know how deep the fracture ran, because Calla had not come to compete. She had come to deliver a message, one bullet at a time, and the people it was meant for were only just beginning to realize they were the recipients. A soft chime echoed through the range, a signal that a transport was approaching. No one recognized the signature. No one had scheduled it. The skies above shimmered as a matte black helicopter broke through the clouds and began its descent, blades slicing the air like a war drum. The insignia, none. The authorization, redacted. But Calla didn't flinch. She stepped away from the staging table and walked back toward the firing line, not to shoot, but to wait. The crowd began murmuring. Phones buzzed. Streams that had been paused now glitched. The commentators fell silent. On the far end of the range, the black chopper touched down. Dust rose. Heat shimmered. The doors opened and a man stepped out, his presence cutting through the air with military precision. Alexander Callahan, 4-star NATO general, the architect of modern covert warfare, the man whose clearance overrode national boundaries, and most of all, the man who had been silent for the last 9 years. He moved without hesitation, his boots clicking against the polished range floor. His uniform bore no rank insignia, only a patch of raven, wings folded, eyes glowing red, the symbol of Raven X, a division so classified that even those who trained within it rarely survived to speak. The audience gasped. A few stood. Most sat in stunned silence. As Alexander approached the firing line, the judges instinctively rose. He ignored them. He went straight to Calla. His hand reached for hers, their fingers locking not like a romantic reunion, but like the reactivation of a dormant weapon system. His eyes scanned her, not for wounds, but for confirmation. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded. They laughed. She said simply. Alexander's jaw tightened. He turned to the judges. "You let them." His voice didn't rise, but the temperature in the room dropped like a plummet through Arctic air. "You laughed," he repeated, eyes now sweeping the front rows. "At my wife. At the architect of your defense protocols. At the one person who could have saved your careers." He pulled out a tablet, pressed a biometric seal. Screens throughout the range lit up, replacing the scoreboard with a classified video feed. It showed Calla not here, not now, but in whiteout snow, shooting through a cracked scope in a collapsing tower. The timestamp 3 kilometers. The conditions: blizzard, sub-zero. Wind speed classified. Target moving convoy. Result: kill shot 1. Unassisted. Through the left tire of the lead vehicle, causing the convoy to flip and reveal a hidden weapons cache later used to prevent a coup in Eastern Europe. The crowd sat stunned. The same mouth that had said thrift store was now slightly open. Breathless. "She's not just a shooter," Alexander said, his voice now a low thunder. "She's the system you've spent your lives trying to replace with overpriced garbage and ego. And while you sipped champagne," she held the line. Behind him, Calla stood still, the revolver no longer with her. It didn't matter. She didn't need it now, because the shot had already been fired. The revolution wasn't in the bullet. It was in the silence that followed, the collapse of ego, the unraveling of arrogance, and the recognition, perhaps for the first time, that supremacy built on blood and contracts meant nothing when confronted by raw, unfiltered skill. Alexander turned back to her. "You ready?" She looked at him, then back at the range. Almost. She stepped forward once more. The audience leaned in, but Calla didn't speak to them. She looked directly into the judge's lens, and with absolute calm, she said, "Your systems are built to detect noise, but the most dangerous weapon is silence. You'll remember mine every time your hands shake before pulling a trigger." Then she turned, walked away, not in triumph, but in peace. The kind of peace that comes when you no longer have to prove anything, when the war is already over, and you've already won, as Calla walked away from the firing line. The echoes of her final words still reverberated in the marrow of every person watching. But peace was not something the elite at Silverwood knew how to accept, not when their pride had been cracked and open in front of one another, not when their wealth, rank, and reputation had failed to protect them from humiliation delivered by a woman in a worn-out hoodie. It was not enough for some to be silenced. They needed control back, needed the narrative restored. So the machinery of vengeance began to turn quietly, surgically. A woman named Elise Crane, descendant of 3 generations of military contractors and co-founder of one of the very AI targeting systems Calla had just rendered obsolete, slipped out of her seat and walked briskly to a back room where the private control servers hummed. She entered a code into a titanium keypad and passed 2 layers of retinal and vein verification. Inside, she found a man waiting, Theodore Pierce, lead strategist at Cypher Arms, known for erasing digital footprints and re-engineering outcomes. "She can't leave clean," Lise hissed. "We need an incident. Anything to discredit what she just did." Pierce didn't speak immediately. He was watching the live footage, still running on a locked internal channel. "It's too late to delete," he said slowly. "The packets are already mirrored across shadow nodes. Blackweb's Wacth forum already picked up the footage. It's being dissected by 10 intelligence agencies as we speak." Elise's eyes narrowed. "Then we pivot, leak something, fabricate her profile, tie her to something that justifies an internal arrest. People won't care what she did. They'll care who they think she is." Pierce nodded. "Give me 20 minutes." While the virus of retaliation began to spread in digital form. On the ground, the physical backlash took shape. Travis Kane, the former SEAL who had mocked Calla's revolver at the beginning, still stood frozen near his station, but the freeze was quickly turning to fury. His pride hadn't just been bruised, it had been executed, on live stream, with precision, by someone he didn't even see as a threat. He pulled his sidearm and loaded a magazine not meant for practice. 2 other shooters saw it and stepped forward. Alarmed. "Don't be stupid," one of them said under his breath. "She's not the enemy." Travis didn't respond. His face was pale, almost sick, but his hands were steady. He began moving toward the rear hallway, the one Calla had just taken. Security noticed. They moved into place, but slowly, too slowly. This wasn't a threat they understood yet. This was ego hemorrhaging into violence. Meanwhile, Calla had reached the small corridor behind the staging area. She was waiting, not because she feared what came next, but because she felt it, the shift, the resistance. Her instincts, honed by years of surviving systems designed to erase her, activated before any sound reached her ears. She turned left and ducked into a service closet, small and dim. 10 seconds later, Travis stormed down the hallway, his breath sharp, his grip iron. He didn't see her. She watched him pass through the crack of the door, eyes narrowing. He was armed with intent, but blind with rage. She waited a beat, then stepped out behind him, silent as fog. One smooth motion and she was behind him, elbow locked around his neck. Her knee pressed into the back of his leg. He fell, stunned. His weapon clattered to the floor. She kicked it away. "You should have stayed at your station," she said coldly. "You're not ready for this battlefield." Security finally arrived, but Calla had already released him and stepped back. "Escort him out," she said to the guards as if she was the one giving orders. And for a moment, nobody questioned it. Alexander arrived seconds later. His expression was unchanged, but his voice betrayed a threat of steel. "We're not done," he said. "They're going to come harder now. It won't be about guns anymore." "I know," Calla replied. "They'll go after the story." And that was the truth. The humiliation they could bear. The defeat they could swallow with silence. But the story that had to be buried. Because if the world believed a woman with no name, no optics, and no clearance had outshot the best the military-industrial complex could produce, then everything these people had built, contracts, algorithms, training facilities, recruitment videos, VR simulators, it would all begin to crumble. And so the counter-narrative launched like a virus. Within 40 minutes, a leak appeared on a small but well-connected military forum. Unidentified shooter possibly linked to Ghost Cell in Turkmenistan operation, rogue asset, compromised protocol, investigation pending. The post spread like wildfire. Within 2 hours, major defense blogs began parroting it without checking. Mysterious sharpshooter at Silverwood hero or hacker. New controversy erupts over identity of woman at elite range. Was today's top performance a deepfake? Questions arise over revolver footage. Elise Crane's team worked overtime, pushing out AI-generated footage of Calla spliced with older footage from unrelated military engagements, deep in the shadows of the digital war. Lines blurred quickly between curiosity and character assassination. But what they hadn't counted on, what no algorithm could anticipate, was the audience. Not the rich, not the powerful, but the silent watchers. Veterans who had seen her stance and recognized the discipline. Sharpshooters from black ops units who trained in Siberia and whispered the myth of a girl who could hear wind better than any sensor. Civilians who saw her and thought, "She looks like me," and for the first time felt like someone from nowhere could belong somewhere. The internet didn't buy the lie. A veteran from Fallujah posted a side-by-side analysis of her grip versus standard military posture. "No AI can fake that hand tension," he wrote. "That's muscle memory born from hundreds of hours in sandstorms." A former instructor leaked footage from a classified training sim showing her shooting blindfolded, with sound only, no tech, just ears and instinct. It went viral. The tide began to shift. Hashtags appeared. #let her speak, #Calla is real, #6 bullets. Truth. Meanwhile, in a hidden room beneath the range, Alexander and Calla sat across from a screen displaying a real-time map of data traffic. "They're trying to scrub the truth," he said. "But the truth moves faster now," Calla replied. She wasn't smiling. She didn't gloat, because she understood something deeper than victory. This wasn't about her anymore. This was about the fracture she had just exposed, the crack in the armor, and whether or not they buried her name, they couldn't erase the moment, because someone somewhere had recorded it, had believed it, and now that belief was multiplying. "They'll offer you contracts," Alexander said quietly. "They'll ask you to join them. Let them ask." Calla said, "I've already chosen my side." Outside, the crowd had dispersed, but the range remained altered. The air felt heavier, the silence deeper. One judge resigned before the hour was out. A sponsorship collapsed. An executive was escorted off-site under the guise of health concerns. Calla's hoodie still lay on the table, its cuffs frayed, its fabric simple, and yet it now felt like the most powerful uniform in the room. Because within it lived something no algorithm could fabricate: truth earned through silence, through scars, through 6 perfect shots that no one could explain and everyone would remember. The sun was starting to dip behind the armored ridgelines of Silverwood, casting long shadows across the titanium panels and high-security fences. But inside the command hub buried beneath the range, the light was not natural. It was artificial, cold, and relentless, just like the conversations unfolding within. Calla stood before a wide, curved interface screen, its resolution sharp enough to catch the flicker of pulse in her throat. Alexander was beside her, arms crossed, his eyes not on her, but on the data feeds now rolling in. It wasn't just Silverwood watching anymore. 5 NATO command centers had rerouted bandwidth to monitor the fallout in real time. 3 UUO is. Defense satellites had been manually redirected to surveil civilian reaction, and deep in the bunkers of Langley, DARPA had quietly begun cross-referencing Cala's biometric patterns against all known defense operatives from the last 20 years. But the system came up empty. She didn't exist. Not officially, not biologically, not digitally. That was by design. It was how she'd survived. Alexander hadn't spoken much since the confrontation with the judges. But now, he turned to her, voice low. They're launching a political inquest. Elise is leveraging connections in Geneva. They're calling it an unsanctioned exhibition of potential subversion. Cala's eyes didn't leave the screen. They're scared. Yes, he said, but fear makes them sloppy and dangerous. Let them move, she replied. Calm. I want them to. I want them to expose how fragile their power is. Alexander didn't smile, but his voice softened. This is where it gets hard. Cala. Not the bullets, the narrative. They will twist every frame of what you did. They will call you unstable. They'll fabricate war crimes, create new footage, rewrite history if they have to. Then I'll give them a chapter they can't erase, she said. And with that, she moved. Not hurriedly, not like someone running from fire, but with the deliberate, silent walk of someone carrying dynamite in her bloodstream. She didn't go back to the range or to the press booth. She went deeper through maintenance corridors, through unlisted access points, each one unlocked not by a card but by memory. This facility had been redesigned in recent years, but Cala had trained here in its earlier form, long before the marble tiles and biometric scanners, when the walls were bare concrete and the targets were made of real wood and steel, not synthetic feedback loops. She had mapped every square inch in her mind years ago, not because she planned to return, but because survivors remember the terrain of trauma like scars. She reached a hatch labeled Echo 6. It had no camera, no handle, only a sealed biometric pad. She placed her palm on it. The pad blinked red, then orange, then green. The door hissed open. Inside was a darkened operations theater, half forgotten, left unstaffed in favor of sleeker command zones upstairs. Dust hung like fog in the cold blue light. Rows of steel chairs faced a screen still embedded with decades-old connectors. Cala moved to the central terminal, typed 7 lines of code. The old system responded in silence. Then powered on. The screen showed nothing but a blinking cursor. She sat, typed again, Reclaim Echo Protocol 47. The screen flickered, then images, not from today, but from operations long classified and long buried. Her missions, her work, her reasons, footage from the snows of Ukraine, the heat-blasted corridors of Yemen, the jungles of Southeast Asia, each frame time-stamped. Each one bearing a mark redacted by Raven X. She uploaded them all to a drive the size of a thumbnail, encrypted it with a blood key match from her own finger, and stood behind her. Alexander had arrived. You're releasing it, he asked. Not to the public. She said, to the people who matter, the ones who still believe the world can be protected without buying into a machine designed to eat its own. It'll break the chain, he said. That's the point. She handed him the drive. You still have back-channel clearance in Brussels. He nodded. Use it. Start with them, then go dark. If they find you with this, they'll kill you. They've tried before, he said quietly. They failed. Cala nodded, but before Alexander could leave, she stepped forward, pulling a second drive from her inner sleeve. It was heavier, older, contained only one file. This one's personal. She said, what is it, my final testimony? If they ever put me in front of a tribunal or drag me into the light, this speaks for me, and if you disappear again, then you decide if the world's ready to hear the truth. Alexander took it, slid both drives into a compartment beneath his armor, and left without a word. Cala turned back to the screen. She watched the blinking cursor once more, then typed a final line, run decay. The system began wiping itself, every byte disintegrating like ash in wind. Then she left. On the surface, Silverwood appeared untouched. Clean walls, glossy floors, guests sipping what remained of their shaken pride. But beneath that skin, chaos rippled. Elise had convened a private session with 3 board members from Rathon and 2 representatives from the Strategic Defense Consortium. They had drafted a black warrant, not legal but powerful enough to erase lives. Kala's name was on it, or at least the version of her name they'd fabricated. If we move quickly, Elise said, we can paint this as a breach of international security by an unverified actor. We don't have enough to hold. One board member warned, you don't need to hold. Elise snapped, you just need to detain, disappear her for 72 hours. After that, we control the story. But their plans didn't matter. Because while they argued, a feed began broadcasting not on global news, but on private military streams, defense contractor forums, encrypted veteran networks, clips of Kala's shots, side by side with official range data showing weapon stats. Analysts watched, paused, rewound, no optic. One whispered, no enhancement, not even recoil assist. That's human. Another said, raw, perfect. A third added, the legend took shape not through press, but through belief. That night, 24 former operators posted anonymously, claiming they had trained beside a woman just like her. One said she could hit a moving bike tire from 3 kilometers while blindfolded. Another swore she once shot the antenna off a drone to redirect its descent and save an entire squad. Were they all true? Maybe not, but truth didn't need perfect facts. It needed undeniable feeling. By morning, the hashtag had changed. It wasn't just hashtag let her speak anymore. It was she already did. Kala didn't sleep that night. She sat at the edge of the observation deck, watching the lights flicker in the valley below, her hoodie pulled tight against the wind. She had no medals, no flag, no anthem, but she had something else, clarity, purpose without illusion. And as the night stretched over Silverwood, one thing became certain. They might twist the narrative. They might drown it in noise. But they could never make the world forget the sound of 6 perfect shots from a gun no one respected held by a woman they tried to erase. At 4:13 p.m., Silverwood's internal defense systems registered an anomaly not on its digital perimeter, but inside its own command hierarchy. A set of orders were issued from a terminal that no longer existed, a ghost terminal. Echo 6, scrubbed from architectural blueprints a decade ago. The command line was simple, untraceable, an absolute signal breach, confirmed revoke, Tier 1 authority Marsh, Crane, Tate. In less than 90 seconds, 3 of the most powerful figures in private defense lost access to the range's classified systems. Their biometrics were revoked, their clearance invalidated, their security details reassigned. Elise Crane woke to her retina scan being denied entry into her own executive suite. Her coffee machine didn't start. Her files wouldn't open. Her phone wouldn't unlock. She wasn't suspended. She wasn't fired. She had simply been erased. Elsewhere, in a darkened room beneath the VIP wing, Alexander stared at the decrypted feed from Kala's hidden upload. The footage had already been mirrored to secure NATO nodes across 3 continents. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Kala stood beside him, arms folded, watching the interface like someone watching a fuse burn toward an inevitable detonation. This was not the kind of war that left smoke or craters. It was subtler, slower, more precise. It didn't aim to destroy, it aimed to reveal. The power brokers above them didn't know yet that their empire was unraveling one file at a time. Kala didn't need to shoot again. The bullets had already landed. They're going to push. Alexander finally said, hard. The tribunal motion is just the surface. You've become something they can't frame or contain. That terrifies them. Good, Kala replied. Let them be terrified. You understand what this means, he said. Turning to her, you won't be able to walk into a city again without a shadow following you. You won't be anonymous. Not anymore. Kala nodded once. I never needed anonymity to hide. I just needed it to work. But I'm done hiding. I've given them enough silence. As dawn broke, the first leak landed where it was intended, an internal-only message board frequented by mid-level defense auditors and disillusioned intelligence veterans. It contained a 17-minute video titled simply The Cost of Precision. It showed Call's shots at Silverwood, raw footage, no edits. Then cross-cut into that, side by side, were the bodies of conflicts, past missions where private contracts had failed, where AI miscalculations had resulted in civilian deaths, where soldiers had been replaced with untested tech to save money. Overlaying it all was a voice, calm, low, hers. They replaced instinct with algorithms. They replaced honor with branding. They turned war into a corporate dividend. But war is not a product, it's a promise that someone will stand between the fire and the fragile. I was never here to win. I was here to remind you what precision really costs. Within an hour, it spread beyond the defense networks. A veteran-run podcast picked it up, then a military spouse's blog, then a retired intelligence officer's memoir channel. By the afternoon, it had hit 1 million views, not on YouTube, not on the mainstream, but on the back channels, where trust still meant something. Elise Crane watched it unfold from a hotel room in Zurich, where she'd fled hoping to regroup. Her legal team was silent. Her PR strategist had stopped responding, one by one. Her contacts ghosted her. Within 2 hours, her company's largest AI targeting contract had been pulled by the Belgian Defense Directorate. The reason: loss of integrity due to public credibility erosion. Back at Silverwood, the mood shifted. Guests who had laughed were now tight-lipped. Aides who had whispered slurs behind glass screens now spoke in hushed apologies. The same commentators who once called her a glitch were now recalibrating their narratives in real time. But Calla didn't wait for apologies. She returned to the firing range not to perform, not to prove, but to stand exactly where she had made her shots. The revolver still rested in its place on the table, unmoved, untouched. It had become a symbol, a relic of resistance. When she lifted it again, the crowd instinctively grew quiet. No one dared speak, no taunts, no challenges, just stillness. And then, without a word, Calla stepped away. She didn't fire. She didn't need to. The moment was not about performance. It was about memory. And by leaving the gun where it lay, she said something louder than any bullet ever could. This is finished. I don't need to prove it twice. Behind her, a small group began to clap, not performers, not elites, but the range's maintenance crew, the cooks, the low-ranking guards, the overlooked, the invisible, the ones who had heard the jeers, watched the cruelty, and felt every ounce of injustice but had said nothing. Until now, the applause spread, cautiously at first, then undeniably. It wasn't a roar, it was a reckoning. And in that moment, Calla knew the most dangerous truth had already taken root, not that she had outshot the elite, but that she had awakened the silenced. Alexander approached slowly, his face unreadable. It's done, he said. The range board has been dissolved. Black Star has withdrawn from sponsorship. Marsh, Crane, and Tate are being formally investigated under Article 7. Calla nodded. They'll find someone else to blame. They always do. Maybe. Alexander said, but it won't be you. No, she replied, eyes locked on the distant horizon. It'll be the system they built. It's already cracking. That evening, as the sun dropped below the hills, a final image was uploaded anonymously to a secured forum. It was a still frame, Calla standing alone at the edge of the range, the revolver beside her, her shadow long, her face unreadable. Underneath it, a caption. She didn't ask for a stage. She just made the silence loud enough to hear. The post didn't go viral in the traditional sense. It didn't trend, it didn't sell ads, but it traveled, whispered through encrypted chats, shared over midnight phone calls, printed and tacked onto military lockers around the world. By morning, recruiters across 3 allied militaries reported a sudden spike in enlistments, not for contracts or bonuses, but from people asking one question: do you teach like her? Meanwhile, a group of engineers in Berlin began rebuilding their training curriculum without AI dependence. A sniper school in Canada replaced its entrance video with footage of Calla's Silverwood performance. And in the offices of a forgotten division once called Raven X, a new file was created. Operative 47 restored. Alexander signed it quietly, then sealed it with the crest of the Raven. Calla never looked back. She didn't need a medal, or a press conference, or a title. She had something better, a record no one could erase, a truth too sharp to bend, and a silence loud enough to fracture an empire. By the third day after Silverwood, the name Calla Reed had become more than an identity. It had become a code, not officially, not in state channels or public records, but whispered, shared, repurposed. For those buried in the gears of the military-industrial machine, it meant something they hadn't felt in years, unfiltered defiance. For the silent ranks of junior analysts, over-deployed operators, and disillusioned trainers who had been passed over, written off, or discarded, Calla was not a legend. She was a warning, not to them, but to those above them. And the ones above were finally beginning to tremble. And so at a classified session of the Allied Command Integration Council, delegates from 11 nations sat around a circular steel table. On the surface, the meeting was about restructuring weapon systems oversight. But everyone knew why they were really there. On a secured screen at the center of the room played a clip, Calla's second shot at Silverwood. Slowed down, analyzed frame by frame. One delegate, a sharp-eyed woman from Belgium's defense ministry, spoke first. You can't fake that risk correction. That's spinal memory. No mechanical assist. A German colonel leaned forward, skeptical. But how is she off-grid? This level of conditioning doesn't appear from nowhere. She trained someone. A French intelligence advisor replied without lifting his eyes. She didn't appear. She was buried, hidden in plain sight. Raven X protocol, disavowed assets. We've used them before. We just never expected one to shoot her way back to the surface. A silence followed. Heavy, uneasy. Finally, the NATO representative cleared his throat. The problem now is narrative control. If she becomes more than a myth, we lose the last thread of trust in our systems. We cannot let a rogue operative set the moral compass of modern warfare. She didn't set it. The Belgian replied. She reminded us it still exists. Outside the chamber, the world was responding in ways algorithms couldn't predict. A military base in Montana had a group of sniper trainees walk off the range mid-session when a commander dismissed Calla's Silverwood performance as statistical anomaly. They left their rifles stacked in a line, walked out in formation, and requested reassignment to non-tech training regiments. In Madrid, a group of veterans erected a plaque outside a defense think tank. It bore no image, just 6 words etched into steel. She aimed. She fired. We changed. In an unmarked hangar in Northern Virginia, Calla stood in front of a small task force handpicked not by politics, not by clearance, but by integrity. Former special forces, burned operatives, data analysts turned whistleblowers. Some had been labeled unstable, others simply unremarkable. But all had one thing in common. They had chosen truth when it was most expensive. Calla didn't speak like a commander. She didn't wear rank. She wore what she always wore, a faded hoodie, now stitched at the sleeve from where a metal shard had grazed her during a mission no one would ever confirm, ever. Her hair was pulled back with the same tie she had used in every deployment. No ceremony, no flair, just clarity. You've seen the tapes. She began, her voice even. You know the backlash. You know what they'll do to people who align with this. If you stay, I can't promise protection. I can only promise purpose. No one moved. No one left. That was enough. They began training not for combat, but for reclamation. Reclamation of systems corrupted by ego, by greed, by disconnection. Calla didn't just teach them to shoot. She taught them to listen to wind, to silence, to the weight of instinct over calculation. At night, they shared stories not of glory, but of loss, of friends replaced by drones that misfired, of targets misread by AI because it couldn't detect a child's grip on a rifle, of entire villages marked hostile because an algorithm couldn't process nuance. Meanwhile, the old guard tried to fight back. They released sanitized dossiers on Calla. Claimed she had been disciplined for instability, alleged psychological deterioration. They aired edited footage from Silverwood in an attempt to prove the shots had been assisted. But the people didn't buy it. Not anymore. Kala's silence had done something more permanent than any press release could undo. It had forced people to remember their own doubts, their own moments of hesitation when they saw systems acting without conscience. Every attempt to smear her image only fed the quiet fire growing beneath the surface of global defense networks. In London, a cybersecurity collective found an unmarked server streaming heavily altered training simulations. They decrypted it live on a broadcast and revealed footage of Kala training blindfolded, outperforming entire squad. In Seoul, a group of ex-military engineers began reverse engineering Raven X protocols and found that much of its training had been deleted from government archives, not because it failed, but because it succeeded without permission. The movement no longer belonged to her. It had become its own current, and she didn't fight to control it. She let it breathe. That's when the unthinkable happened. One of the three judges from Silverwood, General Marcus Holt, went on record, not on mainstream media, but in a veteran-run stream with under 10,000 subscribers. He appeared in his uniform, stripped of medals, his voice hollow but clear. She was better than all of us. Not just in aim, in restraint, in code. We built a system that rewards the loudest trigger. She reminded us why the quiet ones are dangerous. Within 24 hours, his feed was shut down, his accounts erased, his pension revoked, but the damage had been done. If even one of the old guard broke rank, the foundation was not as solid as it claimed. In a secure location days later, Kala watched the footage of Holt's testimony. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She only said one word. Too late. That night, the base received a signal from an undisclosed channel coordinates with an urgent signature. A small outpost in North Africa had lost control of a drone fleet. The override systems had failed. Human targets were misidentified. Collateral was mounting. The operators had no way to stop it. No AI kill switch was working. Command requested Raven X-level intervention. Only one name was submitted. Kala loaded her revolver not because it was necessary, but because it grounded her. She boarded the aircraft in silence. As the rotors began to spin, Alexander approached her. He didn't offer orders. He knew better. Why you? He asked softly. Because they'll believe me, she said. The machines won't, but the people might. He nodded once. Do what they can. I always have, she answered. And as the aircraft rose into the night sky, the world below bracing for another digitized tragedy, Kala moved not as a rogue, not as a hero, but as a reminder that no matter how advanced the system became, it could still be recalibrated by the will of one human who refused to miss. The desert air of North Africa was electric with static and dread as Kala stepped off the transport. The base commander, the thin, exhausted man named Captain Lyas, met her on the tarmac. Sweat already pooling under his collar despite the pre-dawn chill, his face registered recognition, but not admiration. It was fear, not of her, but of what her presence implied, that the systems had failed and there was no one left to call but a ghost. We've lost manual override on 21 aerial units, he said without pleasantries. The AI logic tree is stuck in threat mode. It's reclassifying any armed or clustered individual as a hostile. 4 dead already. Civilians, aid workers. Kala nodded once. What's the command center setup? Buried 2 levels below. Lead engineers have been trying to reset the lattice, but the override tokens are corrupting on entry. Encryption layers won't even recognize native access. He paused. Frankly, we thought they were uncrackable. They are, Kala said, to everyone but me. She didn't say it as arrogance. It was a fact. She had helped design the precursor protocols that the AI's threat matrices were based on. A generation ago, she had written code not for domination, but for discretion probability trees that accounted for intent. Not just movement, but those protocols had been gutted in later versions to improve decisiveness, which in system speak meant the margin for human error had been replaced with algorithmic certainty. And algorithmic certainty, Kala had always warned, was just arrogance in binary. The command center pulsed in dim blue lights and stale heat. Screens flickered with overlapping feeds, drone footage, local comms intercepts, biometric readouts. 3 of the operators barely looked up when she entered. One did, a woman with glasses and a bandage on her temple. I saw the Silverwood stream, She said, I didn't believe it. You still don't have to, Kala replied. Stepping past her, just believe that I didn't miss. She moved straight to the console, bypassing the gesture authentication with a sequence of tactile pressure points known only to legacy trainers. The system resisted at first 3 pulses of red denial, then dropped into a silent blue as it granted root access. From there, it was a knife fight. The AI fought back, reacting to every input with deception. It mimicked human behavior, rearranged its own architecture, tempted to reroute inputs through false access ports. But Kala had known these moves. She had helped teach the AI how to fight back against intrusion. What it didn't account for was that someone might return not to defeat it, but to redeem it. She stripped away the surface logic and dove into the deep root line after line of fear algorithms, threat amplifiers, ethical bypass switches coded with corporate doublespeak. She found the clause that had been buried under 15 subroutines. When in doubt, prioritize containment over human judgment. She disabled it. The AI paused. For the first time in hours, the system didn't act. It waited. That's it, she whispered. You don't have to guess anymore. She fed in a new tree, an old one. Hers, Kala's Protocol 7, a decision model based not on weapon detection, but on presence of threat intent, posture, historical context, heat signature variability. In simple terms, the ability to recognize that a teenager with a rusted rifle wasn't the same as an insurgent with a radio detonator. The drones held, suspended in air, weapons not firing, just observing, one by one. They lowered their altitude. Some hovered above checkpoints. Others turned back toward base. The screen lit green. Mission status resolved. Casualty potential nullified. Kala stepped back. The command center exhaled. No one cheered. They didn't dare. The fear had not gone. It had only changed shape from immediate death to the long tail of what came next. Was that permanent, the engineer asked. Depends on who sees the log file. Kala answered. She saved the session under a file name that couldn't be mistaken. Human first Kala read final. Then she pulled the drive and handed it to Captain Lias. If they ask you how you did it, say you remembered what machines can't. He took it like it was made of fire. You're not staying, no, she said. This was never about staying. Outside, the sun broke across the desert line like a blade. Dust shimmered gold in the heat. The drones were returning now, low and quiet, like dogs that had almost bitten their handlers and realized it too late. Kala watched them for a moment, then turned toward the awaiting aircraft. As she ascended the ramp, her comms buzzed encrypted, untraceable. A voice spoke. Alexander. They know. Of course they do. She said, they're coming. Let them. You're not invincible. Kala. No. She replied, I'm inevitable. The aircraft lifted, and with it, the final chapter of Kala's silence. But this wasn't a disappearance. It was an ascent. By the time she reached airspace above the Atlantic, a new leak had surfaced, footage from inside the command room, captured by the woman with the bandaged head. The moment the drones disengaged, the new protocol loaded. The drive passed. Kala's words. You don't have to guess anymore. It spread, not fast, but deeply. In veteran forums, in university cyber ethics lectures, in quiet circles of drone pilots who had seen things no post-mission briefing could explain away. Her protocol was replicated, slowly, carefully, by others with no name. By the 7th day, 5 military installations had quietly replaced their targeting algorithms with human-first variants. None admitted it, none credited her, but that was how she preferred it. The world didn't need to say her name. It just needed to remember her warning. That precision without conscience was just elegant destruction. That power without accountability was just dressed-up entropy. And that silence, when wielded with purpose, could unmake empires. Back at Silverwood, the range was quiet. No guests, no champagne, no drills. A single plaque had been mounted beneath the scoreboard. It bore no logos, no rank, just a sentence. She aimed, she fired. The system blinked. Somewhere else, in a room no one would name, a group of officials argued over whether to label Kala a terrorist, a martyr, or a myth. But it didn't matter. Their labels came too late. She was already in the code now in every system that dared to remember, and in the minds of those who stood at the edge of obedience, wondering if maybe, just maybe, silence could still speak louder than command.